Today, we're breaking down a real subscriber's retirement plan, and just to warn you, it wasn't pretty. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that we cover everything from A to Z when it comes to retirement planning, with an especially strong focus on the tax side of things, which I feel is often overlooked, and unfortunately, this is exactly what happens here. John and Tracy were on the verge of retirement, and they had just finalized the plan with their advisor. But after going through this process, they just felt like something was off. They've been listening to the channel for a few years, and they realized that the plan that had been put together for them was missing a lot of the strategies that we often discuss. Feeling uneasy, they reached out to us for a second opinion just to make sure that everything was being done properly. And after having a brief conversation with them, we knew that we could make a real difference. So John and Tracy had three major questions that they were looking to have answered. The first one was, will they run out of money in retirement? The second was, how do we draw money out of our portfolio to pay the least amount of tax today and into the future as well? And then their third question was whether or not they were invested in the proper manner for their stage of life and whether or not that manner was tax efficient. So before we could answer these questions, we needed to know how things financially stood for John and Tracy. So we started by replicating their existing plan. John was 63 and was looking to retire at the end of the year, whereas Tracy was 61 and already retired. Once retired, they planned on spending $72,000 per year on their general expenses and had also budgeted $24,000 per year for travel for the first 15 years of their retirement. They also wanted to gift each of their kids $50,000 towards the purchase of their first homes, and they expected that to take place over the next couple of years. In their current plan, they would each start their CPP at the beginning of next year. John was on track to receive 90% of the maximum, or $1,177 per month, whereas Tracy was on track to receive 40% of the maximum, or $433 per month. As for old age security, they would each be entitled to 100% of the benefit, and the plan was to start that at age 65. They had no debt, and their home was worth $800,000, and they intended to stay there as long as possible. When it comes to their retirement savings, they each had $75,000 in their tax-free savings accounts, and they had a joint non-registered account with $250,000. John also had $1 million in his RSPs, whereas Tracy had $250,000. Each of their retirement accounts was invested in the same manner, with a mix of 60% stock and 40% fixed income. So as we know, the stock piece is really going to be the driver of growth, but it also comes with some volatility, whereas the fixed income piece is going to be a lot more slow and steady. So for this portfolio, the software is using a rate of return of 5.22%. As for other assumptions, they expected their home to grow at a rate of 2% per year and were using an inflation rate of 3%. So this meant that their expenses were going to increase by 3% every year just to keep up with the cost of living. As far as life expectancy, they both felt comfortable using age 90. With these inputs, we were able to replicate the exact plan that their advisor had put together for them. Now, looking at this plan, there's really three things that we want to focus on. The first thing is, can they gift their kids each $50,000 towards the purchase of their first homes? Again, the plan was for this to happen over the next couple of years, so their current plan had set aside $100,000 from their joint non-registered account to fund this. The second thing to focus on is, with their remaining funds that they had set aside for retirement, would there be enough there to fund their expense level of $72,000 per year, again for general expenses, and $24,000 per year for travel for the first 15 years of their retirement? Well, when looking at their plan, it was currently 113% funded, which meant that they could actually spend a little bit more and not run out of money by the time they're 90. Now, if they did keep their expenses the same, they would actually have an 8-year retirement cushion, which meant that their money would actually last until they were both 98 years old. In my opinion, this is a comfortable spot to be in, as they do have quite a large buffer in place, and they also haven't accounted for the possibility of a reduction in general expenses later on in retirement. As for their withdrawal strategy, their advisor had recommended using a proportional withdrawal strategy. So this meant that they withdraw on each of their accounts, so RSP, TFSA, and non-registered, in proportion to those accounts' values to the entire portfolio. So for example, after setting aside $100,000 again to help their kids, they would have $150,000 left in that joint non-registered account. Now, as a percentage of their entire portfolio, this represented 9.67%. So let's just say hypothetically that they needed to draw $50,000 out of their portfolio. They would draw 9.67% or $4,835 from the joint non-registered account, and they would keep repeating this process out of each of their accounts until they withdrew $50,000. The third thing that we want to look at is what is going to be their estate value after factoring in taxes. And in this scenario, we're looking at a net estate of $1.33 million. You might be thinking to yourself, Mark, what is wrong with this plan? You said that it wasn't looking pretty, but it looks like they have the ability to help their kids, and they have more than enough money to meet their retirement expenses, all the while leaving a pretty sizable estate. Well, now that we know what their current situation looks like, let's see what changes we can implement to make things look even better. Let's start with helping their kids buy their first homes. Now, I would agree that setting aside $100,000 from the joint non-registered account makes sense, but I would also add that this money should be invested extremely conservatively because, again, they're probably going to need this money over the next couple of years. On the retirement side of things, there's a few changes that I would make to optimize the plan even further. The first thing that their advisor missed is that they each have $40,000 in tax-free savings account room. So first order of business would be to transfer $40,000 each from the joint non-registered account into their TFSAs to have them fully maxed out. The investments in their joint non-registered account are actually down in value, so there would be no capital gains triggered to make that transfer. And another benefit of this strategy is that moving forward, they would have less of their portfolio exposed to the yearly tax that we see in the non-registered account in the form of interest and dividends, because you don't pay those taxes in a TFSA. As for timing their old age security, I would agree with starting at age 65. Now, the math will say that pushing it out to 70 is better, just based on the life expectancy that we're using in this plan. But my concern with OAS is that there is no survivor benefit. So if something happens to John or Tracy earlier than expected, then all payments stop right away. With CPP, I am more open to pushing it out to 70 as there is a survivor benefit. Now, in this scenario, I would advise them to push it out to age 70 for two reasons. The first being is that you do get a pretty good bonus for every month that you defer your CPP. And the second is that it's just going to give us more room to implement an RSP meltdown strategy. The problem with RSPs or any other registered account like a RIF or a pension is that the entire amount of the account is added as taxable income upon the second spouse's passing. This could lead to a large chunk of that account being subject to a tax rate of over 50% depending on what province you're in. So this is the problem that John and Tracy are facing in that first plan that they put together. They still have quite a bit of money left in their RIF, which they're going to face a significant tax bill on. An RSP meltdown strategy allows us to withdraw funds out of those accounts while they're in a much lower tax bracket. So in this plan, we want to target a taxable income of $54,000 a year for both of them. Since we deferred their CPP to age 70, there's more money that we could draw on those RSPs to start that meltdown process. We can see the effects of this strategy with their registered accounts being completely depleted by the time they're in their mid-80s, thus avoiding a huge tax bill at death. As for John and Tracy's portfolio, I would agree that a mix of 60% stock and 40% fixed income is a good place to be for this stage of their life. They are going to miss out on some of the growth when markets are performing, but they're also going to protect themselves when markets aren't performing. However, I would suggest that they use a bucketing strategy, and you can learn more about that here, because having a strategy like this will just give them more peace of mind throughout their retirement. As far as how each individual account is invested, I would definitely look to make some changes there. So whenever you have a withdrawal strategy in place, you need to take a look at it to figure out where the money is going to be coming from to meet your expenses. Now, in this scenario, we're not really touching the TFSA, so we're letting that grow over time. So we want to make that account more aggressive, again, because we're not using it, and we have the ability to have all of that money grow tax-free into the future. Whereas the RSP, we're going to draw on that much more aggressively, so we want that account to be more conservative because we're going to be withdrawing funds right away. So overall, we want to keep that 60-40 mix, but we just want to be more efficient as far as where those individual pieces are held. So by making these 4 or 5 recommendations, we've now increased their retirement spending ability up to 119%, up from 113%, and their net estate after tax has increased to $1.9 million, up from $1.33 million. So an increase of $570,000. So to answer John and Tracy's questions, yes, they do have the ability to gift each of their kids $50,000 to help towards their first home purchase, and they are in no danger of running out of money. When it comes to their withdrawal strategy, I would not implement a proportional strategy as currently recommended, and would instead look to implement an RSP meltdown strategy targeting an income of $54,000 per year while deferring CPP to age 70. On the portfolio side of things, I would agree with the mix of 60% stock and 40% fixed income, but I would make sure that the TFSA is invested more aggressively, whereas the RSP is invested more conservatively, all the while maintaining that 60-40 mix. If you think you're leaving money on the table when it comes to your retirement plan, check us out at transcanadawealthmanagement.com.